So this fall, our services are focusing on the fruits of the Spirit. So knowing that, I just need to say right off the bat that our guest liturgists today, C.B. Stewart, S.E. Borden, Matt Cleaver, and Ruby Rims, are four of my favorite fruits of the Spirit. So I think that's illustration enough for the entire year. But today, we have to talk about the ninth fruit, self-control. And that might scare you a bit, but rest assured that I am just as scared. Just ask the entire pint of ice cream that I devoured last night, and it will gladly tell you that self-control does not park itself anywhere close to my wheelhouse. But today's ancient testimony suggests a different type of self-control that interests me even more than ice cream. Here, in the pages of Mark's Gospel, is one of several examples of what some scholars call Jesus' messianic secret. Throughout this Gospel, and most importantly in this scene with his disciples, Jesus orders those around him to keep mum on who he is and what he's up to. He maintains control over his identity and his real name and purpose. He refuses to allow others to co-opt that identity for their own plans and desires. In contrast, this past Palm Sunday, if any of you were here, we talked about Jesus' Passover parade entrance into Jerusalem as his coming out, his first major public spectacle as an oppositional force to be reckoned with by the political powers that be. But that Palm Sunday coming out moment is preceded by chapters and chapters of Jesus traveling alone, virtually incognito, except to the few outsiders who've started to follow him and his miracle-tinged exploits. In these chapters, Jesus has the same refrain. After he speaks or heals or casts out demons, he orders the wide-eyed onlookers to hush up, to not tell anyone what's happened or who they think he is. A full half of Mark's Gospel includes several instances of Jesus keeping this secret identity. It starts with him ordering demons who recognize him to keep their mouths shut, then moves to him ordering the folks he's healed to keep their mouths shut, and then climaxes in this moment with the disciples. Now, this climax would be really, really satisfying if Jesus then told the disciples to now go out and tell everybody about him, but he's tricky. He doesn't do that. Instead, he reveals to them exactly what kind of Messiah he's going to be, still telling them that it's not the right time to tell anyone else. Now, I'm a nerd who loves clandestine mystery schools and cults and secret knowledge, so I can read these verses and get excited about Jesus having an inner circle to whom he's offering exclusive content, but ultimately, I think we all hope that Jesus wants to share his story with many more than just the elite few. So another way of interpreting this moment is to consider that Jesus is participating in a sort of self-control, a careful crafting of his message, a deliberate shaping of his identity. And I believe he wants to do this so that he can stay in control of himself, of his message, of his identity, instead of allowing the clumsy, the misinformed, and at worst the malicious to shape that message and that identity for him. Now, there are lots of reasons for this type of self-control. In Jesus' day, the term Messiah meant lots of things to lots of people. Even though it basically meant anointed one, there were disparate groups who believed disparate things about what an anointed one would do for them. Some thought the Messiah would be the future king of Israel. Some thought the Messiah would be a cosmic ambassador from heaven. And from these two main ideas sprung myriad messianic possibilities. So the disciples calling Jesus the Messiah could mean tons of different things to tons of different people, especially if that message were to get out and spread without context. So Jesus needs to say, hold up, not yet. let's keep this just between us, just for now. And I have another idea about why Jesus wants to keep this secret for a bit longer. It's not just because he wants to keep people from making assumptions before he can set them right. I think it's also because he himself is still figuring out who and what he is. Jesus must maintain self-control because his divine self is still cooking. Jesus is still becoming Jesus. Leading up to this moment, we've got examples of Jesus figuring himself out, making what some might even call mistakes, from the two-step miracle with the blind man in which his first trick doesn't work and he has to do it again, to his unintentional encounter with the hemorrhaging woman, to his nearly disastrous dismissal of the Canaanite woman. Jesus is still learning what God is enacting within him, and he's failing, learning, and creating himself through many trials by fire. So at least two things are shaping Jesus. One is divine, and that's the Holy Spirit swelling within him to the point of spilling over. The other is totally human, and that's the encounters Jesus is having with the people around him. He's gradually discovering who he is, both through his continuing encounter with God and through his continuing encounters with other humans, and he is the product of all of these encounters with essentially his social network. And he is carefully allowing that social network to grow through time and experiences. Now, speaking of social networks, hey, Angela, our most popular technological one, Facebook, has been in the news a lot lately. There have been battling with drag queens and transgender folks and plenty of others over their real name policy. Basically, Facebook started deleting accounts of drag queens whose profiles were reported as bearing non-real names. When these drag queens fought back, Facebook countered that argument with telling drag queens that they can start public figure pages for themselves instead. The problem is, a Facebook public figure page isn't a free personal page that connects you with friends. It's actually a tool to promote yourself by paying money to advertise to Facebook users. What was once a personal way to connect with friends becomes a transaction in which people must pay to promote their identities to strangers. Oh, and not for nothing, having your real name used on Facebook makes you a whole heck of a lot easier to track for advertising purposes. So, in the middle of this hullabaloo comes a new social network site called Ello, whose manifesto that CB read is basically an anti-Facebook screed. This new site promises to never feature advertising and to never enforce a real name policy. Ello allows folks to assume whatever identities they desire, whether that name's a drag queen's campy play on words or the moniker of a transgender person's forming identity. Accordingly, queer folks and their friends are leading a mass exodus from Facebook to the promised land of Ello. Now, there are many who don't trust Ello's seemingly good intentions. The site was kickstarted with venture capitalist money, and if I may be cynical, I think it probably won't be too long before Ello drops its anti-advertising mission. But no matter what, the last 3 lines of Ello's manifesto should stir ripples in our heads and hearts, because Ello is stating the obvious. A social network should always be a tool for empowerment. And the members of that social network should always be at the helm of creating their own authentic identities in whatever way is authentic for them. Like Jesus, we are still cooking, and we should allow others to continue to cook as well. Identity is sacred. It's not about pieces of government-issued paper, and certainly not about capitalistic algorithms that track our online activity. It's about authenticity. What is happening inside each of you is as divine as what was happening inside of Jesus. And we continue to shape our own divinity the more we authentically interact with one another's authentic divinity. So we've got advertisement-addled Facebook, if we want to keep it, and we've got advertisement-allergic LO for the time being. But what exactly is a social network anyway? I believe it's something much like the disciples were for Jesus. It's a growing group of friends, witnesses, and supporters that surrounds each of us as we continue to discover, delete, shape, shift, and transform our sacred knowledge of who we are. And that's where I want to slightly nuance Elo's final line. It's true. We shouldn't be products of advertising and capitalism. We shouldn't be sellable and buyable things. But we can, and even should, be products of one another. And this can happen by approaching social networking with new eyes that take us back to an old model, and we're sitting in it. Church was the original social network. At its best, church not only connects us to the divine working within us, but also to the other folks around us who are trying just as hard as we are to figure it all out. By coming together in community, we not only maintain a personal, even mystical relationship with God, but we also create relationships with people that question, trouble, affirm, and most importantly, change who we are. Church, at its best, welcomes questions, delights in conflicting answers, and leaves the space wide open for individual and collective transformation. When I first started coming around Judson, way back in 2009, Donna suggested I might get along quite well with her rambunctious associate pastor. You might have heard of him. His name is Michael Ellick. No? Okay. She set us up, and I'll never forget our first date at a cute little dive called Toasties. His eager energy, coupled with my own, immediately burst into our first project together. We called this program Pop Lab, a populist conversational laboratory, and it was basically designed to mirror our first conversation and recreate it among the Judson congregation. In that first afternoon, Michael and I asked each other countless questions about spirituality, art, and politics, and here's what ended up happening. As we answered and interrupted one another, we started finding all kinds of new, surprising, silly, and weirdly transformative things to talk about, mostly comic books, but that's another story. And we both decided that it was one of the most sacred conversations we'd had in a while, and we realized that that is what church as social network can be all about. It's not about perfectly packaged spirituality. It's not about somebody standing up here and giving you something to take out into the world. It's about a community coming together in all its diversity and continually exploring what it means to encounter the divine and the human working in each of our lives, in each of ourselves, allowing these selves to be continually remade by this radical, sacred act of social networking. Because just like Jesus, this simple act is preparing us for our coming out. It is ritualistic rehearsal for our confrontation with the powers that be, a confrontation that we know must happen. Knowing that we are always becoming ourselves empowers every scary choice we make. So today, I invite you to re-meet your social network at an upcoming Pop Lab. Mark your calendars for Saturday morning, November 22nd. We've talked a lot over the past few months about Judson being in transition, and it's time to gather up our social network again and decide who we want and need this awesome animal we call Judson to be. Because we can try to define the mission of Judson all we want, but Judson is not a mission statement. Judson is the sacred pooling of all of us. Defining it only works if we gather around tables and get to know one another again. It only works if we get rid of simplistic real name policies and approach one another confident in our own individual identities and open to believing that our names and our egos and our entire selves are ever-evolving histories of our sacred encounters with the divine inside one another. I can introduce myself to you, but I also need you to introduce yourself to me. And this exchange must continue as often and as openly as possible for as long as we are making church together. So, here's my introduction. Hello. My name is Micah Bucey. I love David Bowie, Betty Davis, comic books, musical theater, and ice cream. I ran from the church for 10 years, and then I finally found a place called Judson, where it seemed like there were as many people asking questions as were in the room, and they were asking the sort of similar, kind of, but not really questions that I'd been asking all of my life. Now, who are you? We can get back to that later. Let us pray. Creative hands of the universe, thank you for this place. Thank you for these people. Thank you for every name in this growing social network.